Hi, folks. This post, what do we call it? A video post. This is me, and I'd like to reflect upon poetry, and specifically Urdu poetry, even though what I want to say is not really specific to any particular language or expression of poetry in any particular language. It is something which I have reflected upon, thought as time has passed, and I'd like to express it. So, I am very interested in Urdu poetry. Urdu is the national language of Pakistan, and it has a rich history which goes many hundreds of years, if not thousands, actually, thousands of years. It is sort of an amalgam of many languages. It borrows from so-called languages of the soil of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, like Sanskrit, uh, Siddhaiki, and also it has, like English, it has absorbed many other languages which were not traditionally the languages of the soil itself, and those are, for example, Arabic, Turkish, Persian, and English as well, and others. But that's besides the point. What I really wanted to express today is my experience of having tried to write poetry and what it tells me. So, I'm very familiar with Urdu poetry, and but as a reader, um, at least at least 30 years of reading and enjoying good Urdu poetry. That is an experience I have, and it is clearly something I am passionate about. I understand the uh, the entire context of the beauty that is Urdu poetry. And over here, since my only reasonable exposure is with the Urdu poetry, but I believe none of what I'm saying is specific to any language. So I'm familiar with the nuances, the vocabulary, the symbols, and everything that makes the richness, the beauty of Urdu poetry possible. And poetry, as you know, is magical, basically. At times, you can say in a couple of lines and say it very effectively things which are not even possible to be to be said effectively, even in dozens of books. Basically, that's the nature. So, due to some reasons, I also for about a year or so, not for about a year or so, a year or so ago, I started writing poetry myself, Urdu poetry. Um, it was not something, and it still is not something that I am proud of in terms of what it is as an artifact, whatever I produce. It's not something I can proudly display as the work of a great poet or even a reasonable poet. Um, Not at all. And I can say that with confidence that because um, I know Urdu poetry, I know what is good poetry, what is not. So even though I have, I believe, said some good poems as well, but more often than not, it was expression. However, having said that, uh, it has been a very interesting journey so far, and it is happening even today, and I intend to carry it forward further. And it is interesting on account of many reasons. Many reasons. The foremost is that I wanted to reflect on the process. What is it that goes on in my own mind when I have the urge to express something as a poem? No matter whatever its poetic um, richness is or is not, that's besides the point. The main point is I wanted to be self aware of the processes that push me to express in poems. That is number one. Number two is that I am familiar with the um categories of uh, that are there in every language where there is a tradition, that, this is this kind of poem, this is this kind of poem, this is a long poem, and these are its traditions, the prosody. Um, uh, in every language, they are there, right? So there are traditions that have to be followed, and even though I am very much cognizant of them as an Urdu poetry uh, lover, but I was very conscious not to go to any book of grammar, any book of those rules, the categorization of poems as they happen, as they are, um, categorized. And that categorization, what really is it? It's a tradition, basically, right? And you can choose to follow it, you can choose not to follow it, and that's the real um, expression. That's really something that I want to express basically over here. So these are the 2 points. And number three, I could not help but reflect on what really is the purpose of poetry. Everything needs to have a purpose, right? Well, that's not an easy question to answer, but let's say if there is a purpose of poetry and something which is so common across all languages, across all cultures, across different times of human history, I find it hard to believe that such a lasting tradition across all the variations of human societies is without a purpose. There has to be some purpose at least. So these are the three things of which I was aware, and I reflected upon them often. I still do. Um, there is a fourth reason as well, which is somewhat related, that the reason that I did not want to revise my knowledge of the rules, the categories of Urdu poetry and its methods, its rules, its categorizations. Nothing. I intentionally avoided doing that, even though I could quickly refresh um, myself on those topics, and I could jog my memory by, hardly taking a few days to go through all of that and to, even go further, to go in depth. I could do that. I chose not to. And that is for a reason. The reason I basically chose not to do that is because I wanted to reflect, and reflect often, on so called, I'd like to call it exploring poetry from the ab initio method, the first principles, without the burden of rules and categories, traditions, anything at all. I wanted to explore what is it that I am experiencing. Why is it that I at times have the urge to express a poem, express a thought, an emotion in poetry? Why? And how is it that I manage to do that? How exactly? I try to be aware of it. And also, what is it that I'm doing exactly when I am expressing a poem? What really are the processes that are going on inside my mind? at least a conscious mind that I'm aware of. So that I have reflected upon, uh, and I'd like to say a few words about these reflections. So, what really is poetry? Ab initio, right? First principles. So, what really is poetry? It has to do with, more than anything else, patterns of um, many things, but mostly and most importantly, patterns of sound, the rhythm, the pattern, and how to um, use that pattern in expression, right? So let's say, um, what would have happened, in the human history. What would have happened that led to the invention of poetry, if it's an invention, and it clearly is, um, at least to quite an extent. So the underlying common urge, the basic urge of us as human beings, I believe it's an urge, but there is also a practical utilitarian perspective too. The basic urge is to communicate, to just tell somebody what is it that I am thinking about, what is it that I am feeling, what is it that I want to get done. I want to communicate. That is a fundamental urge. And um, language, interestingly, is a key, or at least the quality of language, the degree to which we as human beings are able to express in language, is something which is unique to humans, and it has significantly aided. Uh, I'd even say that it has been a critical component of human progress. It enables us to do what we can. So language and its forms, whether written or spoken or both, are more than anything else a means to communicate. All right. So let's move on further. Communication, for whatever reason, is a human need and an urge too. That's who we are. We want to communicate. We want to let somebody know what is it that we're feeling, um, thinking, etc. So what happened really? First of all, the I'm not a linguist. As a layman, I do have an interest in linguistics, but not formally at all, and not in any depth at all. But what would have happened? Some early humans would have, discovered sounds, different kinds of sounds, and decided on a meaning that is attached to each sound. And then when they started writing something, they would have attached a certain sound to a certain written symbol, and that's language. The more sounds, the more different kinds of sounds that you're able to make, and attach them a symbol, a written symbol, the richer your fundamental alphabet becomes, right? So alphabet is the fundamental building block of a language. What comes next? What is it? So we make words from alphabets, which is a joining together of underlying sounds expressed as symbols in alphabet, joining them together to make further complex sound, and so on and so forth. And then attaching meanings, of course, to those complex set of sounds, which we call words. And for those meanings to have a key critical quality, that those meanings need to be shared, right? So it means nothing if I invent a word and nobody else knows that what is really the meaning of that word. It's useless, right? So any kind of word, or even a basic building block like um, an alphabet, is useful only to the degree that it is shared. if there are other people who attach the same meaning to it that I intend to attach to it. This is a concept that is common to whatever tier, whatever degree of abstraction we are talking about, whether it's the basic degree of an alphabet, right? Or words that we form from it. So, all right. So after the words, they are also building blocks, right? The words are building blocks, and we use those building blocks to form further complex structures like sentences, so on and so forth. We make paragraphs, we write essays, we write novels, or complex kinds of things expressing a variety of in depth, in breadth, um, emotions, thoughts, concepts, and every kind of human expression. Whatever it is that human beings want to communicate, they do. So there are different directions, you know. So the prose is certainly one direction, which is where language has um evolved. But then there is also a different direction, and that is poetry. So how does poetry differ from prose, and why? So the key thing that makes poetry different from prose is the rhythmic nature, right? You have to have a repetition of some kind of a rhythm, audio rhythm. Uh, it has to be rhythmic in terms of how it sounds, basically. It's all about that. In prose, it's of no value, you know. Even the prose has its rules and categories, like a novel is a novel for a certain reason, a short story is a short story for a certain reason, so on and so forth. It does have its rules, but they are not, in their fundamental character, the rules are not rhythmical. They are not concerned very much with the repetition or repetitive behavior of sound patterns, right? So these sound patterns are what make poetry what it is. All right. So much, so far so good. And in that sense, poetry has much in common with music, because you know music is also about the rhymes, right? Music, you know, is rhymes, is about patterns uh, of sounds, right? Basically. So there's a fair overlap with what is expressed musically and what is expressed in poetry. All right, and there is also another significant overlap. It's about emotions. It's very it's really very effective to express emotions and feelings through poetry and music rather than through prose. I'm not saying it's not possible in prose, it certainly is. There are many powerful, emotional novels and short stories and whatnot, but it's not to the degree that you can do the same thing through poetry, through music. There's a reason, after all, that powerful poems, powerful songs are often used to stir the emotions of people, right? All kinds of emotion, from love to even hatred to war hysteria, anything that has to do with human emotions. Why is that? I don't really know, but that's what it is. A linguist would know more, but this is where what my reflection has led me to. All right. So let's move on further to the purpose of poetry. Why is poetry useful? Why? And this is something I have reflected on quite a bit. Um, Before that, however, before I tell you what I think about it, let me just also tell one other thing, and that is regarding the process that I have followed, as I mentioned earlier too. that I wanted to really explore from within myself, not through books, not through knowing what um, anybody else has to say about this, but through true self reflection. I wanted to explore how is it that set of sounds, which they are basically, evolve into what is known as refined, powerful, expressive, emotional, informative poetry. How? So yeah, that has always been a process that has been there in my mind as I have tried to express poems. All right. So back to the question of the utility of poetry. Why is poetry useful? I have thought a lot about that, and from what I can tell, at least my opinion is that there are only two purposes of poetry. The number one purpose is the same as it is with any form of expression, any form of creativity, whether it's in the arts or sciences or any human endeavor. And the reason is the satisfaction, the self satisfaction that comes from the mastery of any skill at all, any skill. If you learn to play football, you get good at it, you feel happy. If you learn to play a musical instrument, a violin or a sitar or whatever, and gradually, day by day, you do get better. And as you master it, it makes you happy, basically, because you have gained a certain um, skill that is clearly valuable to you and others as well. So, and in addition to its value, the very act of expression, the very act of being creative, of expressing something, of creating something, is is really synonymous with what it means to be human, right? So in that sense, the purpose of poetry is not too different from the purpose of anything else at all. The purpose of science, of violin, of painting in arts, or of physics or mathematics, or playing hockey or cricket or baseball or soccer or whatever. The purpose is giving a creative vent, a channel to the human urge to create something, to make your life useful, amount to something, the basic human urge. And in creative arts, it carries on an additional dimension, which is that in addition to serving uh, as the fulfillment of human creative potential, it is also a means of expression just for the sake of it, right? If there is also a human urge to communicate, we really want, when we're thinking of something, if we have an opinion, if we love somebody, if we hate somebody, if we have other feelings, patriotism, you name it, we do want to tell somebody, at least somebody. That's so that is an additional meaning, additional purpose of poetry. All right, so this was the first purpose that, in my humble opinion, poetry serves, and it's pretty good. I can tell you that when I have expressed poetry, poems, I absolutely loved the experience. I have absolutely loved it. I never thought I would. I would ever. I would never thought I would ever be doing writing poetry, but I have, and I have loved it. I still love it, and it's very therapeutic as well, right? So it fulfills a fundamental human need of expression um, and being creative, right? And for me, that alone is a good enough reason. Even if nobody listens to what I have to say, the very act of expressing it is meaningful to me. It makes me happy. And if other people listen to it, they give their opinion on it, then even more so. All the more so if there is something that I want to communicate to the masses, yeah, then even more so. And that leads us to the purpose number two. In my opinion, there is one thing that poetry does which is very difficult, if not impossible, to do in other endeavors, and that is the teaching of many of the skills, arts, imagination, creativity, human command over language, human command over the expression of ideas, human command over the ability to manage to imagine things. All of that all of that combination, that I believe is something that nothing else, absolutely nothing else, can do as effectively as poetry does. And there is its utility. If this tradition of writing poetry is not taught, how to teach it is a fundamentally different subject, and you can only teach it so much basically, but even that aspect needs to be taught. What those the dimensions of those teaching are, we'll maybe talk about it later. But the fact is that this tradition of writing, expressing, even understanding poetry is very, very useful for us as humans, because what it teaches, to the degree it teaches, is and it's not one thing, it's many things. All of those things, they are basically very much at the root of what it means to be human, right? Amongst other things. But I really believe that this is where the purpose of poetry is very, you know, clear and unmatched as well. So, in poetry, you imagine all kinds of stuff. Your imagination it goes wild. You imagine things which are not there at the moment. Maybe they were there in the past. Maybe they will be there in the future. Maybe they will never be there, right? Nevertheless, the ability to imagine in itself is a very useful tool. It's a very useful skill because it lies at the core of what it means to be human. And anything, any skill, any endeavor that helps in propagating the sense of imagination is very, very useful. And I believe the way poetry does it, many few things other can do, if at all. So, and by the way, not just writing poetry or creating poetry, the ability to understand, to have a refined taste, the ability to enjoy poetry, to go where the poet wants you to go, or even beyond that, it's not unheard of that a reader, interprets poetry himself or herself, yet even things which the poet might not have intended. But as Nietzsche said, there are no facts, just interpretations. And here we are not even talking about the hard sciences, right? Uh, this is as interpretative as it gets, right? And that ability to interpret it, to imagine the way you want, is very useful because it lies at the core of human creativity and human identity. It is something that is needed, right? So, that I believe, that ability to be creative, to polish your imaginative skills, and the ability to have command over language, which is a tool of communication basically, All of these abilities, they're set. The way poetry can teach it, I believe nothing else can do that. And this is where the true, really, really true purpose of poetry can be found. That's basically what it has led me to believe. All right, so that's what it is. I love to listen to if to all of you. You can leave your thoughts in comments. If you think, if you agree to it, if you do not agree to it, what in your opinion is the purpose of poetry? I'd love to know that. Please do, please share it. Um, but before leaving you folks today, I'd like to leave you with another thought. So a poem, for example, is an artifact, right? It's an artifact of poetry, of language, and it's an artifact of a um, human endeavor, basically, and it's a work of art too, right? So it is interesting then that I'd like to draw an interesting comparison. Why is it, let's say, that a poem by, let's say, any legend, excuse me, let's say a poem of any legend, uh, Goethe, for example, or in English, let's say John Keats, let's say they have a beautiful poem, right? Where really is its value? Is the value in the paper that is used to publish it? If it is if it is copyrighted, the publisher has the copyrights. Is the value in the money that exchanges hands when a certain person buys that book of poetry and reads it? Is the value is in sharing that work of art, that poem, through digital media? Let's say I send a beautiful John Keats poem to a friend on WhatsApp or Facebook. Clearly that's not a material thing over there, right? So I think we could agree that that is not where its value is, right? It's the value of poetry is rather abstract. All right, so far so good. I understand that. Pretty much everybody understands that. But here is a difference with another form of art. Let's say we talk about painting. Why is it that painting, which is also a means of human creativity, uh, you know, it is a means of fulfilling that urge of human creativity and artistic expression in a certain format, of a visual format. So why is it, let's say, that the work of a great artist, a painter, let's say Picasso, for example, or even people earlier than that, or even people later than him, why is it that they are sold at various price tags? Why is it that the original has so much value? Where is its value really? Let's say, imagine a great painting by Picasso. Is the value coming from the paper on which it is painted? Is the value coming from the paints that are used, or pencil or charcoal or whatever, the physical medium that is used to create it? Is that where its value coming from? Well, clearly not. Because the same paper, the same brushes, the same charcoal, the same pencils given to anybody else would clearly not result in exact same work of art. So if that really is the case, why is it that those paintings, the originals, have high monetary value as opposed to, let's say, their copies? If I were, photographing a great Picasso expensive painting in some art gallery or somewhere, right? And I send that photograph, a very high resolution, beautiful, perfect photograph, to any of my friends on WhatsApp or Facebook. Is that as valuable as that physical painting? If not, why not? If yes, then why? Clearly, the people who buy art don't think of it as being equally valuable. Why not? Where does the abstractness go over here, right? Analogously, in poetry, a poem is an abstract thing. It's not on the piece of paper that it's written on, it's not on the digital uh, media that is used to propagate it. That's not its nature. The fundamental nature is abstract. I believe the same is true of painting, right? It's a work of art whose true value is in what it is. And what it is not its material aspects, it's not its paper, paints, charcoal. Why is it then that there is a stark contrast between uh, the way people look at a painting in its relatively physical form on paper as more valuable than a digital copy for the sake of discussion? While in terms of poems, it's not the case. Why? So, with that parting thought, I'd like to thank you if you've managed to listen to it all the way. And please do leave a comment if you'd like to. Thank you very much. Bye.